Braves and baseball fans, it's time to take a trip from coast to coast across Major League Baseball.
There it goes, a long drive. If it stays fair, home run.
One strike away. Sandy into his windup. Here's the pitch. Swung on and missed a perfect game.
Fly ball deep left center. Grissom on the run. Yes! Yes! The Atlanta Braves have given you a championship. Listen to this crowd.
Left side, Swanson to first. Braves are world champions.
Braves and baseball talk, straight from the diamond. Here's Grant McAuley.
Hello and welcome to From the Diamond. I am Grant McAuley. These are the Kia Studios of Sports Radio 92.9 The Game in Midtown as we close out another weekend and catch up on what's been going on with the Atlanta Braves and the rest of Major League Baseball. And unfortunately, we kind of have to start the show out the way we've been starting the show out way too much this year, and that is to say that the Braves have lost another game on a Sunday. They have lost a series finale, and as the case may be, they have lost a series. And this one just feels kind of like a microcosm of the season. They've been through this a lot. There's just no way around it. The inconsistency of this club, the ups and downs of this club, the emotional highs and lows of this club. It's hard to believe that we're not even quite mathematically halfway through the year. And you've already expended this much, I would say, emotional energy. Because it's certainly been that if you're a Braves fan. You've been waiting for this club to click, to maybe have some things go its way. You feel like you get a little help into that when Atlanta was able to, I think surprisingly, sweep the Mets. A first-place club that had a, 13-game lead on them coming into that series, and they're able to handle their business. And then you go down to Miami and face a last-place team and lose 2 out of 3 in that series. And to make matters worse, the losses on the field may not have even been the worst of the weekend for the Braves because Chris Sale, the ace of their staff, the, I think, front-runner for the Cy Young Award for a second consecutive year, and you're going to lose him for an undisclosed amount of time with a fractured left rib cage suffered in the 9th inning of his near-complete game effort against those New York Mets on Wednesday at Truist Park. So we're going to have to unpack all of the fallout from that. Now, obviously, we'll discuss the weekend and, try to put into perspective what the Braves still have ahead of them and what they need to accomplish. Now, I don't mean ahead of them over the course of the entire season. Obviously, there is still a good portion of the baseball season left to be played, and, this loss to the Marlins, this series loss to Miami, doesn't really derail the entire year. It does set you back. There's no two ways about that. And the frustration factor, it gets dialed up a little bit each time you lose what I feel like is either a winnable game or a series. And in this case, this was mathematically a very winnable series for a club that wants to do the kind of things that the Braves want to do. And when you start to stack up the two rosters of these clubs, you expect the Braves, more times than not, to win that series against Miami, and they flat out were unable to do that. So we will get into that, and we will, of course, discuss all of the, fallout's probably the best word for it, losing Chris Sale for whatever amount of time that he is out for. But before we get into all of it, I want to remind you, as always, you can find From the Diamond here on 92.9 The Game on Sundays from 5 to 7. You can also subscribe wherever you get your podcast, and, of course, find it on the Odyssey app. You can follow me on social. I am at Grant McAuley. The show is at From the Diamond with an underscore on the end on X and no underscore on Instagram. If you want to follow along there, that would be great. And you can also find links to everything that I'm doing at FromTheDiamond.com. So a few ways to connect with me and to hear what you're probably about to hear for, I don't know what number time this year. I guess at least the 41st time this year. The Braves lost a baseball game. And that doesn't have to be the end of the world. Because as you come into the year, I think, and you have those expectations, however sky high they might be. At some point, as I think as a baseball pragmatist, if that's a word, you're going to lose 54 games over the course of the next 6 months. 54 games. You're going to lose those because the best teams in baseball. You win 54, you lose 54. It's what happens in the other 54 that tells the tale of your season. And the Braves right now are losing games at a pace in which the tale of their season is starting to become a little bit more difficult to project forward because they're running out of the opportunities that they need to kind of turn things around. And again, we're in the middle of June. I'm not sounding the horn that, hey, season's over. It's not. Stranger things have happened than a club 6 games under 500 figuring it out over the next 3 months of the season. The way that you watch this club, though, tells you that some things have got to change in order for the Braves to be one of those clubs that does reverse its fortunes, change its destiny, whatever you want to use as far as those, big words are concerned, big thoughts, big feelings. But I think people are in their feelings about this club because of the inconsistency that they've shown, particularly offensively, and it's just another example of it down in Miami. I know that on a day that Bryce Elder pitches not extremely well in the finale, gives up 5 runs, that's not a great start. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the pitching staff is not culpable in a loss. But there have been so many times this year where you just felt like if you had a little bit more offense, you'd be able to look a little bit differently upon the chances of this club, the overall trajectory of this club. And quite honestly, their record would be at least the reverse of what it is right now. Because when the Braves lost to the Miami Marlins on Sunday, they dropped to 35-41 on the season, 6 games under 500. And that's not a place that the Braves have found themselves this late in the season since way back in 2017, the last year of the rebuild. Now, we could go back further than that. I've seen much worse Braves clubs than this, but I think that the point that, and I know I've talked to this point a lot on social media, is, you've seen a lot worse Braves teams, but you haven't seen a lot worse or a lot more inconsistent Braves teams, let's use that word, that has this kind of expectations. Look, as a kid, I didn't understand a lot. I knew that the Braves were my favorite team, but I also did understand that, they're not the best team, though. But they're my team, damn it, so I'm going to be behind them. And that's kind of how it works for a certain period of time. And then you start to wander into the land of expectation. And that land for the Braves was established in 1991. And ever since then, you pretty much expect the Braves to be in a much different stratosphere. All those years of losing in the 70s and the 80s, they gave way to some really great times. And I'm not here to give you a history lesson, just here to tell you that expectations are a difficult thing. And the Braves are having to, I think, grapple with their own expectations. And obviously, the fans are along for the ride. And this ride has been, I've said this time and time again, a roller coaster of a season. There's just no way around that. You lose the first 7 games of the year, I can do some simple math. That's the reason you're under 500 right now. That's not the way you want to start the season. But not only did you lose those first 7 games, but your left fielder got suspended. And we'll talk about the Jurickson Profar news from this week, because he'll be back soon. And you lose one of your best starting pitchers for what could be the season in Ronaldo Lopez, an all-star. All of that happens in the first week. You still got 155 games to go, so you can't pack it in. It's too early for that. But it's been a long and difficult and arduous task for the Braves to try to drag themselves or pick themselves up by the bootstraps, find their way back to 500, and get above and beyond it. Because about the time that they did, they went right back into a tailspin where they lost 6 consecutive series, and what really didn't make sense about that was it was in the middle of getting 2 of the players back that you really needed to feel like you were at optimum level. And one of them is playing like maybe the best player on the planet. His name's Ronald Acuña Jr. And the other one, the former Major League strikeout leader Spencer Strider, who is starting to look a lot more like Spencer Strider here lately, and I'll get into that. And we'll talk about Ronald Acuña. Why not? We might as well have something good on the show. We might as well have something good to talk about this year. And I joke, but I don't know how funny it is at this point. You kind of laugh to get through the tough times. Well, it can be a little bit difficult. You got to reach way down into your bag of tricks to come up with something funny enough to get people to forget about the combined frustration, the compounding effect of losing winnable games, which the Braves have done at a rate which not too many teams in the game can say that they have. I believe the Braves are 10-29 in one-run games. They haven't won enough of those. They were finally able to break that 10-game losing streak in one-run games as they were busy sweeping away the New York Mets. And I don't know, let's drop anchor there for a minute. You looked at what the Mets were going through. They came in just having been swept the previous weekend. And a lot of clubs over that 6-series stretch that I was talking about, where the Braves lost all of those series, whether it was the Padres or the Diamondbacks or whoever it was, the Red Sox, they'd roll into Truist Park, having not played particularly well on a losing streak, and then they win a series against the Braves. So it was like the opposite effect. It's like the Braves should be getting right against these clubs that are losing. And instead, it was the exact inverse of that. Now, the Marlins, that's not one of those cases. This I would look at as one of those series where it was close, it was frustrating, you should beat these teams, you should win these series. You're not going to win every game. I'm not here to tell you that you just look at a last-place team and say, you got to sweep them. Now, the Rockies, that felt a little bit different because Colorado Rockies are a historically terrible team. The Marlins are not a great team, maybe not even a good team, but they're not a historically bad team. And they were able to win 2 out of 3 in the series. But the fact that it happened right after it felt like maybe the Braves finally got that emotional windfall, that moment that everybody's been talking about of, okay, is this when the season turns around? Is this the scene in the movie where they go on the montage of winning that lasts for, 2 months, 3 months, whatever it has to at this point? But I don't know when that montage is coming. But the Braves have not found that winning streak yet. And that, I think, is a differentiator between 2022, 2023. I know 24 was certainly not that way, but there was a time at which it did feel like the Braves at least started to play a little bit better brand of baseball and drag themselves across the finish line in the postseason, winning 89 games a year ago. But this team, I don't know. To get to 89 wins, you start doing the math, this club's got to play at about a .650 winning percentage. That means winning 2 out of every 3 games for the rest of the year if you want to get to 89 or 90 wins, because I think that's the threshold to get into the postseason, even though it's expanded. So, I don't know. I'm not a huge math fan, but I can't deny what it means when you start to look at the cold, hard reality of what the numbers are telling you. And the numbers tell you a few different things, and a few different numbers. Let's go with that. The Braves, as currently rolling along, are not a good baseball team. They're 6 games under 500. Most good baseball teams are not under 500. However, good is a subjective term, can mean a lot of different things to a lot of people. Do they have the talent to be better than this? Well, of course they do. And then you start to get inside the numbers of why they are where they are. I told you about the 1-run losses. Here's a couple of more for you. The Braves are 2-31 this year when they score 3 or fewer runs, and that's not surprising. I think if we were to run the numbers for all 30 Major League Baseball clubs, you would find that when you score 3 or fewer runs, you're probably losing more of your games. Not shocking. But it does go to show you that they've scored in 33 of their, 76 games, so over 40% of their games, they're not scoring enough. You don't score enough, you lose games. When the Braves score 4 or more runs, so let's flip it to the other side of the coin, they're 33-10. That is better than a .750 winning percentage. Remember that thing I was saying about how the Braves have got to play .650 baseball for the rest of the year to get to 90 wins? Might want to consider scoring more than 4 runs a night, on average. And not even on average, because you get those nights where, hey, you scored 8, then the next night you scored 2. Oh, we score 5 runs a game. Well, you do, but that's deceiving. And you can't really get caught in that. But that is how this works. But on the aggregate, the Braves need to do a better job of scoring more than 3 runs. I don't think that really anybody's here to argue that, including the Atlanta Braves, who are very much trying to figure that whole thing out. But I think, once again, as you look at this series, by and large, this is another one where you just needed to go out there and just out-hit these guys. Yep. What is it in boxing? You just like a first-round knockout, early round knockout. Let's not even play around. Let's not get to round 12. Or when I was growing up, when there's 15 rounds, and then they decided that was way too much CTE, so let's dial it back 3 rounds. But I don't know. You just feel like they're playing down to the competition sometime, or just not up to the level to which they need to play. And then you think about, wasn't it like 4 days ago when they just wrapped up an emotional sweep against a Mets team that they very much needed to sweep? That felt like not just a must-win series, but we got to sweep it. If you don't sweep it, where are you at that point? 16 games out of first place? Halfway through June? Not a lot of clubs are climbing back from that hole. And forget the division. Your wild card hopes take a hit when you continue to lose too, and you have to climb over more teams to get one of the wild card spots, and that is what the Braves are looking at. So, there's a lot that's going on right now for this Braves club, and it's in the midst of a 13-game stretch of series, 4 different series against National League East foes. You swept the Mets. Great. Big-time check mark, check plus. Great job. You lose 2 out of 3 to the Marlins. Sorry, see you in detention. This is not working. What are you going to do in the 4 games against the Mets at Citi Field, where I think they're going to feel some kind of way because they're at home, number one, and number 2, they're not going to have forgotten that little sweep. So maybe the Mets come in with a little bit extra motivation to say, hey, let's go ahead and step on these guys' necks and get done with it. Be done with it. Let's deal them that knockout blow that I was talking about. Typically doesn't happen in the last week or so of June, but look, the Braves have put themselves in a precarious position with regard to the division, and tied to those hopes, of course, are their postseason aspirations in general, which also take a hit, as I mentioned, when they continue to lose games. But that showdown is coming up. 4 games this time at Citi Field, and the Braves have got to find a way to win another series and to keep their season on the rails. I feel like we have kind of gotten to that point. So we got a lot to get into on this show. That's going to be one part of it. We'll dive into this week in Braves baseball, unpack the loss of Chris Sale, the transcendent play of Ronald Acuña Jr., the loss of the Marlins series as well, and I'll be joined by Chris Cotillo of Mass Live to get the saga behind the Rafael Devers trade between the Red Sox and the Giants. All of that and more is coming your way on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley here on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game and the Odyssey app.
I love baseball. Now back to more Grant McAuley and From the Diamond on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
This is From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game and the Odyssey app. Going to launch into this week in Braves baseball and remind you, as always, though, you can subscribe to From the Diamond wherever you get your podcasts. Leave a review, too. We always appreciate those, and hopefully you'll give it a better review than maybe the Braves have gotten over the first 71 or so games of this season. But jokes aside, I think that the reviews obviously are kind of still pending when it comes to what the whole story is going to be. But the story that we have been watching unfold thus far for the Braves has been an up and down journey. And the Braves saw some more of the downs on Sunday. And these past two series, I'm talking about the one against the Mets and now the one that just completed against the Marlins, were really, I think what the Braves were looking at is kind of stepping stones along the way to getting themselves back to 500. You needed that Mets series in the worst way. You needed to take 2 out of 3. You swept it. You needed the Marlins series to be probably what you got in the Mets series. You do some math here, and yes, the Braves have won 4 of the first 6, and typically that will play. But you feel like you left money on the table, I guess. You left something on the table anyway, down in Miami by not beating a last-place team and taking the series from them. If you want to lose a game every now and again, that's just going to happen. Just the nature of baseball. But this was just not the series that the Braves needed to continue to carry that momentum into what was, I think, going to start to be the real test. The real question is, head on into enemy territory and take on the New York Mets for 4 games. And when you're done with that, follow it up with another head-to-head meeting against the Philadelphia Phillies. And if you look at the National League East standings, which I'm sure many of you have at this point, and I actually sign off on it because it's after Memorial Day now, but the Mets and the Phillies, they've been going at it a little bit. And they may be going at it for the rest of the year. How do you insert yourself into that picture? Well, I don't know. At this point, 10 and a half, 11 games out, maybe just getting back to 500 is the way that you start to get back to what we'll call the island of relevancy. That's where the Braves are trying to get so that they can make the decisions that they want to make when it comes to the trade deadline, which I do want to get into a little bit. I think it's still a little bit early, a little bit premature. We can kind of get on the ride of the pendulum of, the Braves won 3. What do they need? Let's go get another bullpen arm and another starter and somebody who can do XYZ that energizes the lineup. That's what we were talking about 72 hours ago. Now we're talking about, do we really need Ozuna? Maybe you trade Iglesias if he pitches well. We should break some things down and start rebuilding the farm. We heard Alex Anthopoulos this past week. He was on with Dukes and Bell. Mike and Chris Thomas talked to him. And I think Alex continued the message that he has sent all along, which is the Braves do not fancy themselves as sellers. Now, inside of that, I think you have to be honest with yourself as an executive who makes the decisions, and obviously as you size up the team as well. Depending on what happens in the next 3 to 4 weeks, it's going to inform the kind of decisions you're making. Because you're certainly not going to empty out what is left of your farm, which is not a higher-rated farm system in all of baseball now, to go bring in a bunch of pieces for a team that's 6 or 10 or more games under 500. You're going to have to put him in position to make those kinds of trades. Now, there is a window of time, I think right now, in this next week or 2, where if Alex Anthopoulos could go on that preemptive strike, maybe you do galvanize the club a little bit. Maybe you do fire him up. I mean, they went out, and I know nobody wants to hear about the story of 2021 because, gosh, who wants to relive that World Series winning season when we're busy being miserable? No, I'm just kidding. But I know that not every season works out that way. That's obviously the outlier. That's the exception to the rule. That's when everything goes right. I think we have some experience since then of what happens when things go wrong. But can you galvanize a clubhouse? You absolutely can. The Braves went out. They got Jock Peterson. They got Stephen Vogt. And I feel like that kind of helped them from a veteran perspective after losing Ronald Acuña Jr. for the season. The Braves didn't pack it in. And then they made some inspired moves at the deadline to pick up a bunch of guys that nobody wanted and go on a run to the World Series. So, crazy things can happen. But that's not always the way that it's going to be. And I think everybody knows that. So what do the 2025 Braves need? Well, the answer to that is consistency. Honestly, that is it. There is a group in that clubhouse of hitters, and we're starting to see some signs of life from some. But you got to get more out of others. Who are the 2025 Braves? I think that's a good question to ask at this point because we're really about to find out. Maybe you got an indicator against the Mets. Maybe you got a subtle reminder that they're not quite there over the weekend against the Marlins. Doesn't mean the season's over. Doesn't mean the ship is taken on water and it's going to end up at the bottom of the ocean, but it certainly felt like you could have done more there, and you could have. And it's not going to be easy going however long through this stretch and beyond without Chris Sale. Because just when we heard from Alex Anthopoulos that he would not even consider trading Chris Sale, it's a complete non-starter, not going to happen, no way, not going to do it, then Chris Sale lands on the injured list. And that, it truly feels like a cruel twist by even the 2024 and 2025 Braves standards of, well, really counting on this guy, oh man, now he's on the IL. Okay, well now we're counting on this guy, okay, now he's going on the IL. It just seemed to be one thing after another, but you hadn't really gone through that this year. Even though, like, losing Reynaldo Lopez, I'm not going to short sell that. I mean, he clearly could make a big difference to helping their pitching staff out. The suspension of Profar, yeah, it's kind of a kick in the groin, if we're being honest, because you didn't even get a chance for him to make an impact before he took himself out of your plans. You can spin that a lot of different ways, and I'm sure in a couple of weeks when we hear from Profar and he explains it away, and maybe he just falls on the sword, which is fine. Like, I get it. It's sports. Everybody's looking for an edge or whatnot, but there are rules. It's still by his own doing. And so he and his teammates will have to come to terms with that and move forward, and maybe he can help them out to get to October, because he's not going to be able to help them once they get there. He will be packing his bags and watching from the stands like everybody else. But either way, without Chris Sale, you wonder about the viability of the rotation. Not that there aren't other capable arms in there, because we'll talk about Spencer Schwellenbach and Spencer Strider a little bit later in the show. Those are guys you can build around. I think Grant Holmes has also been very good. And I know this wasn't Bryce Elder's best start, but as a fifth starter, you feel okay about him. Well, the thing about this is, now he's not your fifth starter anymore. He's your fourth starter. Now you're missing A.J. Smith-Shawver just a little bit more. And now you're wondering how much you can put on the shoulders of a 20-year-old and Didier Fuentes, who you just brought up, who, as I talked about with Dukes and Bell over the calls this week, you basically strapped a rocket to that kid's back and shot him straight up through the minor leagues at a pretty substantial pace. And how much can you ask of a kid like that? Well, we're going to find out, because I think that promotion was based largely, obviously, on talent, not experience. But he's about to get some experience, some out of the frying pan into the fire experience, because you're going to need him to start a game against the New York Mets this week, as things would happen, because you don't have Chris Sale. Now, Chris Sale was putting together, I thought, another magnificent run. And I know that there are a lot of people that, and this is the hindsight's 2020 part, well, should Chris Sale have even been going for a complete game? I'm not even going to get into that in terms of, like, giving that a lot of credence, because, look, Chris Sale at that age and the way he was pitching, and by that age, I mean by that tenure that he has, he was rolling. He was going to get the opportunity to complete the game unless somebody reached base. Well, he did everything he could to keep somebody from reaching base, and unfortunately on that dive on the Juan Soto grounder to the mound, he ended up injuring himself. And I'm sure I'm not alone in being one of those people, as I sat there and watched it, thinking, I really hope he's okay. Because how could you not? He went through a 5-year string where it wasn't just, hey, you've got an arm injury, see you in 14 months. It was liners that go off your pinky and other weird things that have fallen off a bike, for crying out loud. Some fluky, freakish, weird stuff that happened to him. But this, even by those standards, is particularly cruel. And now the Braves are going to have to figure out a way to rally around what they have and not worry about what they don't have. But losing Chris Sale, I talked about, could you go make a move that galvanizes the club? I think you could. Could you also suffer a loss that could do it in a totally different way? Possibly. But they're going to have to find a way to compartmentalize that, because nobody's saying Chris Sale's out for the season, but, you know, if you want to WebMD this thing, is it 6 weeks? Is it 8 weeks? Is that of absolutely no recovery whatsoever, not picking up a baseball for that length of time, and then he's got to go out through 4 or 5 minor league rehab starts and get himself back to that level? We don't know. We're going to find out. But keep in mind, spring training, Sean Murphy got hit in the back, goes down to first base. Things seemed to be fine. Then all of a sudden he realized, I woke up the next day and couldn't really breathe. So that seemed to be kind of not great. Then he got checked out, found he had a cracked rib, and that cost him weeks of the season and also opened the door for Drake Baldwin. So this injury to Chris Sale, while unfortunate, it's the reality of it. And as I've heard Brian Snitker, I've heard Austin Riley, I have heard Matt Olson, I've heard a host of Braves say, look, nobody's going to feel sorry for us. Every team's going through it. We just got to figure it out. I mean, I heard that so many times last year, it wasn't even funny. You don't want to print the shirts, but you could have, because that seemed to be the deal. Injuries are part of the game. But promoting a 20-year-old in Didier Fuentes, who's going to get some run in rotation for a little while, it's an upside move. And I think it's kind of a sink-or-swim type battlefield promotion. That's two different things right there. It's just all wrapped into asking a lot of a 20-year-old with a very short resume to come in and step up. And I did like what I saw. He made one mistake against Miami on Friday, but you can tell from the stuff why he's up here. It's just, can he trust Drake Baldwin and Sean Murphy maybe to help him through this? And also trust that stuff. I think that it gives him that opportunity to at least do what he needs to. And if you're talking about a fifth starter that could give you, I don't know, I'd say 5 good innings, reverse engineer that thing and figure it out in the bullpen over the final 4. If you can just get the 5 out of him. But the trio of Spencer Schwellenbach, Spencer Strider, and Grant Holmes is going to be leaned on to lead this staff. And like I said, Bryce Elder has been serviceable, but there's just no way around missing Chris Sale. It's going to be difficult. But the bullpen, I think, has benefited. And we're going to hear from Pierce Johnson in a little while. I had a long and very, I thought, fun and candid conversation with him when the club was playing the New York Mets. I believe it was Thursday that I caught up with him. It's about the life of the bullpen, individually and collectively, and what they go through in a season or in a game, for that matter. How it's managed, like what it takes to be a successful reliever in the big leagues. It's not an easy job. But I say all that to say I think that they have benefited from the kind of continuity that you've been getting from the rotation. You're getting 6-7 strong innings just about every time. You get a complete game from Spencer Schwellenbach plus an off day the next day. That's like hitting the lottery. Being able to reset that bullpen for 48 solid hours. And then you had Chris Sale go out there and pitch himself into the 9th inning. And obviously what happened, that's unfortunate. But I don't think that that's any kind of indictment on Chris Sale or Brian Snitker for letting him have the opportunity to complete that game. I think that people that are kind of focused on that kind of stuff, I would hate to see how you handle more important things in life than that. But be that as it may, I just don't really hang my hat on that being a major problem. If you'd known a lot of things were going to happen before they happened, then you wouldn't do them. Sure. But I didn't see anything wrong with Chris Sale getting that opportunity. But that bullpen, this could be a bigger test for them because they're still not running at optimal levels. A little recalibration going on with Raisel Iglesias. I'll get into that a little bit later. You got Pierce Johnson. You got Dylan Lee. You got Aaron Bummer. You got some veterans in there. And you've got a couple of guys I think are starting to pitch a little bit better, which is going to be worth diving into. And I will talk about the Braves bullpen a little bit later on. But offensively speaking, that is where the power is for this club and the opportunity to, I think, show what they truly can be. And you're going to need guys to step up, not named Ronald Acuña Jr., but we might as well talk about Ronald Acuña Jr. because, as I said, I do like to have nice things, and this is a particularly nice one. National League Player of the Week a week ago hit over 600, struck out 1 time, bashing home runs at a rate that he has not in his career to this point. I think if I did the math correctly, as of Saturday's game, Ronald Acuña Jr., if he plays the majority of what's left this season, is on a 39-homer pace. That's accounting for the 50 games that he already missed. He's on a 40-homer pace without the 50 games. Give him 50 more games. I think you kind of get where I'm going with what pace he's on. And I think he's on pace to be the starting right fielder for the National League in the All-Star game. And that may not sound like much to get excited about, especially on a day that you lose 2 out of 3 to the Marlins. And Acuña played great all weekend, but the Braves weren't able to win the series. But it is kind of a testament to the hard work and dedication that Ronald Acuña Jr. has put into his rehab and coming back here as, and no jokes here, the best version of himself that maybe we have ever seen. And it may not be in the stolen base column, though I think he's going to run as he needs to and as he wants to and as it makes sense for the club for him to do. But, man, what I'm seeing at the plate is top of his craft level stuff. But he's going to need a little bit of support in that regard. And we're seeing Matt Olson now starting to put things together. Coming into Sunday, had that 22 game on base streak. And was batting .296 with a 400-plus OPS, a 500-plus slug, and 20 runs knocked in over those 20 games. Those are the kind of numbers you need out of Matt Olson. There wasn't a ton of homers, but getting on base a lot, driving in runs. You're going to need that. And Matt Olson's one of those guys. Austin Riley's another one. Marcell Ozuna is another one. I think those 4 guys are kind of the core of they may have to get it done more than just about anybody else because you got some other guys in this lineup that are struggling. Can Jurickson Profar make an impact when he comes back on July the 2nd? Braves are hoping he can bring some of the contact and on-base skills. He popped a couple of home runs on Saturday. has looked pretty good thus far in Gwinnett. He'll be back on July 2nd. You'll see. Maybe that will finally solve the number 2 spot of the batting order. It'd certainly be nice. For $42 million, it ought to solve something. I'll tell you that. But they're hoping that the struggles of Ozzie Albies and Michael Harris are going to start to turn around. Coming into Sunday, Ozzie, over his last 20 games, batting .162. The power, the extra base hits, fewer and further between than you've expected or been accustomed to over his career. And then Michael Harris, batting .188 in June. And had another tough day on Sunday, bounced into a double play in the 9th inning that was particularly troublesome. And I don't know, maybe we'll do a deeper dive on it at some point, but I think you see Michael Harris caught between 2 schools of thought. I don't want to miss my pitch early, so I'm going to be aggressive, but I think it might be playing into the hands of the pitchers, and I think that they know that, and I think that that's what we've been seeing. But the Braves are going to need some guys to get turned around, to get things going at the same time, to have some consistency going on, but we've known that all season long, and can they do it in 4 big games against the New York Mets coming up? We'll find out. Coming up next, we will talk a little bit more about what's been going on this week in Braves baseball, and I'll share my conversations with Pierce Johnson and with Dylan Dodd, who's getting a crack at the Braves bullpen as well. That comes your way next on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game and the Odyssey app.
Back to Grant McAuley for more From the Diamond on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Welcome back into From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game, live from the Kia Studios. As we continue this week in Braves baseball, a few more things to talk about, and we've, of course, got a trip to take around the big leagues where some other interesting things were happening across the game of baseball. I've narrowed down a few of those, and I'll be joined by Chris Cotillo, who's going to give us the insight on what in the world happened with the Red Sox and Rafael Devers, because that situation went from bad to worse to over altogether, with a somewhat surprising trade to the San Francisco Giants. But I think the question ultimately will be, was it really that surprising? We'll ask Chris about that. That's coming up at 6:20. So stick around for that. Now, for the Braves, there are a few things, a few more stats that I have to give you that may not make you feel great about how they're trending this season. And let me tell you, if this show feels like it has the same tone every Sunday, it's because it does. The Braves' Sunday record this year, and Sunday's the day I do this show. Now, I've been able to do a couple before games, so we'll put those in the outlier column. Maybe this control group. It's how the show would sound if it was an off day. I don't know. But the Braves are 3-9 on Sundays this year. So 9 times we've been through this little exercise of what is going on in the series finales. And, of course, the Braves are playing a decent amount of games on the road, and I was just looking at other reasons why the Braves are not faring so well. And it's not just their record on Sundays. That is anecdotal and affects me probably in preparing for the show a little bit more than the average person who just gets to turn the TV off and go about their day. But the Braves on the road this year are 13-26. That is one of the worst road records in baseball. Not the worst, but one of the worst. 13 games under 500 on the road. Well, you know why they're that far down, because you lost the first 7 on the road to start the season. But overall, the Braves have not found any consistency at least being a 500 club on the road. Since then, they're 13-19 on the road. So 6 games under 500, regardless of that first little 7-game losing streak to start the year. And let me tell you, a lot of people would like to say, oh, yeah, regardless. Let's forget about that. Let's put that thing away. But it is following them around, kind of like a bad penny. When you start to look at all their records, you can still dial it back to, well, how did you start? Because a lot is made about it's not how you start, it's how you finish. But if you start bad enough, it's going to be really tough to finish because you're going to be too far behind, and that seems to be what's kind of been going on with the Braves anyway. But the pitching, let me say this, as I have been a broken record over the course of the first 2.5 months of the season, the pitching is not the problem. Can it get better? Could you find ways to upgrade? Yes. Is it going to be difficult to go without Chris Sale? Absolutely. However long that goes on, you need something out of Spencer Strider in the meantime. And he's looked a lot better. And we will talk about Spencer Strider in the last couple of starts and the trends inside of that should have you feeling a little bit more comfortable with the idea that, hey, this guy is here and ready to really contribute, because he's looked like it. Spencer Schwellenbach has also been very good. So you've still got a couple of pitchers that can lead this rotation. And I think Grant Holmes has been underrated at least this year for what he's been able to give this club. But I talked about a few minutes ago, the bullpen has been the beneficiaries of how good the starting rotation has been and how much the starting rotation has filled up the innings column. I just went and did a quick look Atlanta Braves relievers this year are 30th in Major League Baseball in innings pitched. They have pitched the fewest innings out of the bullpen of any team in Major League Baseball. So if you wanted a little bit more to kind of co-sign on what the starters have done to carry the load, carry the freight for this club, it doesn't get much more direct than that. Bullpen ERA is a respectable 3.78 this year. Rotation 3.58. I believe that's prior to the game against Miami today, but still, it's going to be right around that. It's not going to move very much in one game unless it's really, really bad, and this was not that bad. But that bullpen has been benefiting from some things this year, like the starting rotation, to kind of, I think, counteract for the fact that they've been understaffed and a little bit under fire this year and underwater sometimes out in that bullpen. You've had the struggles of Raisel Iglesias, who I wouldn't say was demoted from closer, but at the very least they had to hit that reset button and give him an opportunity to take a beat or two and get him back on track, because you're going to need him to step back in and pitch some meaningful innings for you. And I think that the last few outings should make you feel a little bit better about how Raisel Iglesias is trending. But I caught up with one of the members of the Braves bullpen, somebody who's seen a lot, who's pitched all over the place, and who's been with the Braves for a few years and knows how a bullpen is put together and what's expected of it, to just get a little bit of insight. So I caught up with Braves reliever Pierce Johnson on Thursday at Truist Park, and here's my chat with him. A lot of interesting stuff. I want you to take a listen. Every year's different. You've been around this club for, the better part of going on 3 years now, and you've seen the evolution it's taken. Guys who were here are not here. Guys who are here, sometimes struggles happen, and then adjustments have to be made. How would you describe the 2025 bullpen in terms of just, I guess, finding that balance that I'm sure everybody's looking for?
Kind of amphibious, kind of whatever that they need to be that day. Bummer will go out there and go multiple innings, and the next day he'll come in and face one batter and get out of a jam. Iggy's been one of the best relievers in baseball for a while. He's definitely, just got electric stuff. He's been a closer for so long. He's got an incredible resume. And how many guys have gone out there their entire career and been dominant the entire time? Yeah. Not many. Right. And that's a pretty selective group. And, he had some hiccups, but also he had a ton of bad luck. Mm-hmm. So the fact that, Dylan's come in and done a phenomenal job. Days Bell is doing a great job. Everybody's kind of stepped up in the role that they need to. And it's just been helpful because, if I've thrown 2 of 3 or 3 of 4 and I need a day, guys have stepped up in that role and done a really, really good job.
It's kind of a question we get a lot on the media side of it, but you're living this day to day. There's a lot that goes into managing a bullpen. It's not simply, okay, it's the 7th, 8th, and 9th. We throw the same 3 guys every single time that the score is this or that. Is there a misperception of maybe like what is expected of the bullpen and obviously the responsibilities that you guys are handed, because you're not robots and it's not a video game?
Exactly, and it's different, right? Like they don't know how many times we got up, to get warm. Maybe we got up 2 innings prior and then we got up that inning and then we ended up going in and we've already thrown 30 pitches down there, just because when you get called in the game, you got to be ready to go. And then you also, from the coach's perspective, all right, we know we're going to go face Arizona. They got a ton of lefties, so you're going to try and preserve your lefties for that series. And then you also know that, like, hey, you can't just throw your long guy to throw him, because who knows what tomorrow holds. Right. And say your starter, God forbid something happens, like has to come in and throw multiple innings. What if he threw multiple innings that day? Then your bullpen's super taxed after that, and then you still have the stretch of 17 games. Or it's just the game planning is so hard and it's so intricate and it's a chess match from the manager's perspective, that there's so many other variables that they have to look at, and the general public doesn't know that. And it's so hard because you have to be on every single day. There's no turning off that switch. Like, you might be able to kind of sit there if you're Iggy and Dylan and you're later in the game or start of the game, you don't really have to be as dialed in. You can kind of sit there, relax, take your breaths, have a water, Red Bull, and then all of a sudden, the 5th, 6th inning comes around. You got to have your routine down. You got to know your scouting report. You got to know, hey, who's catching today, who's coming up, who's hot in the lineup, who's going to be stealing. And also, that's another thing, is like, who's going to be able to hold a running game when, guys are on base or whatever it may be. So there's a lot of different variables that go into it that are a part of the formula, but the general public doesn't know the formula.
Yeah. I think one of the more interesting things, too, over the last, especially 20 years, is the complete game has gone away. We saw Chris Sale come with in and out of it. We saw Spencer Schwellenbach throw one, but usually every year it's maybe 3, 4, 5 for some teams, maybe a little bit more. But that also puts a lot on the bullpen, because you may use more relievers, which means, like you said, everybody's got to be on that day, and that increases the possibility that somebody either runs into bad luck or just has a bad day.
100%. And, I don't think our starters have gotten enough credit, and honestly, our catchers too. People forget that our catchers work their tails off every single day, are grinding every single pitch. They're working with each other, even if they're not catching. They're helping the other catchers, telling them what they see, what their thoughts are. So there's so many things that go into it from that perspective too. But our starters have done such a good job for us that they have preserved the pen. And for Schwellenbach to go do what he did and give us as a bullpen a day off and then a true full team day off, like what that does for a player not only physically but mentally is huge. So you can go into some big series kind of refreshed, ready to go, and they've just done a really, really good job for us, and we need that. And it's been awesome to watch.
Let me wrap up with this, because you've been a part of this team for several years. You've got a long career in Major League Baseball. You've seen slow starts, you've seen lulls and slumps and all of those things. Where's your confidence level at for the group of guys that's inside this clubhouse moving forward in the next, 90 or so games to still be able to accomplish the things you guys set out to do when you reported to spring training?
Full confidence. I walk in this clubhouse every day and expect to win. I mean, we got an incredible lineup. We got incredible players. We play the game the right way. It's one of those things where last year we were riddled with injuries, and this year it's hard for everything to get churning on the same path. It's a group effort, and look, even the day that the hitters did phenomenal and put up 10 runs for us, we blew it as a pen, and that's baseball. And it sucks, because it would have been really nice to win that series and go on into San Francisco, and then I blew 2 in a row, and it's just like, it sucks, because that's 3 wins you could have had right there, and that changes the script a little bit. But honestly, we got a really, really good group of dudes. Everybody's professional. They get their work done. It's fun to be a part of, and I'm excited to see where we go from here.
Well, thank you for all the time. I appreciate it. Continued luck down the stretch.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate you. Thanks.
Yeah, and we'll see what happens ultimately as the season plays out. But it's good to kind of get some insight from the guys that are in those trenches every single day. And, that's about as candid and open as you can be, because there are a lot of different things that go on when you're managing that bullpen. It's not as simple, as I mentioned, as just, hey, you got to throw the same 3 guys out there every time. You can get away with that in the postseason, and I think that's one of the things that worked really well for the Braves in 21, because you have those off days built in. So you're not necessarily going to throw 3-4 full days in a row over and over, because there's always an off day that's kind of rolling in and helping you out, and the breaks between series as well. So, there's a lot that goes into this bullpen mix situation, and I think there's a lot to learn throughout the course of a season, individually and collectively, and they're figuring it out just like the rest of us. And one of the pieces that's been added to this bullpen here lately is a familiar name, but a brand new role for him, and that's Braves left-hander Dylan Dodd. Now, Dodd made the club in 2023 out of spring training as a starter, and I think that was somewhat surprising for a lot of folks, but he showed in the minor leagues that I think there's something there. But you got to find the right role, and relieving, I believe that could be the right role for him. So I wanted to kind of chat about that switch as a 27-year-old trying to get to the big leagues and stay there, what this process has been like for Dylan Dodd, who has thrown extremely well in Gwinnett after a bumpy beginning, and shown the Braves that, hey, there might be a little bit of something here. So there's my conversation with Braves lefty Dylan Dodd from Truist Park this week. Obviously, it's a new role, but it seems like it's one that you've really taken to. What has it been like moving from that starting role where you're looking to go through a lineup 3 or more times to maybe just coming into a very specific situation?
Yeah, I think, it's been an adjustment for sure. Early on, I didn't really have a good idea of what I was doing in terms of preparation and when to be ready, when not to be ready. But I've been able to kind of adapt and figure it out. And when it comes to the pitching side of it, I think as a reliever, I've just been able to simplify things. It's not like I'm trying to get pitches in the game or things like that. It's just whatever I got right away and let it rip as much as possible.
When you say letting it rip and not really having to hold back, have you seen that uptick in velocity? And if so, what kind of things is that kind of unlocked for you to be able to just let it go, let it eat for an inning?
Yeah, I think so. I think velocity is up maybe a little bit, at times more than others. But I think, in terms of pitch usage, I've been using the cutter slider thing kind of more often, which I think has taken or has actually made the fastball better at times when I've had to throw it.
The adjustments that you do make from year to year, what did you learn from, say, 23 to 24 and then 24 obviously into 25 from a pitchability standpoint that maybe let you get to know what in your arsenal that you can really count on, or that you've been able to refine that maybe has taken that step up?
Yeah, I think just the more experience I've gotten, the more comfortable I got, which is, I think, by far the biggest piece. But also just, making that switch to reliever, my body, just feels incredibly better day to day. I had a hard time just getting every 5-6 days of getting my body back to 100%. And not that I was ever hurt throwing or anything like that. It was just general soreness that I just couldn't seem to, catch up on. And I think, after making that switch, my body and everything's felt a lot better.
I guess there's no way to know until you do it, but did you anticipate maybe that you might be throwing more days, but it might actually be easier on your body in different ways?
Yeah, honestly, I really didn't have any idea what to expect. I relieved a little bit last year. But a lot of times, especially in AAA, it was like piggybacks where I was scheduled. I still went long, and then I still would have like bullpens and time in between. So I really didn't know what it would be like going, back to back or, pitch, day off pitch. But so far, my body's felt great. And there really hasn't been a day where it's like, oh my gosh, like I can't throw today.
Yeah. Let me ask you, just opportunity standpoint. You got one of those as a starter a couple of years ago. You've gotten to see some up here, but this bullpen needing some help in different places. Some guys that were here in the past are no longer here. And obviously a bullpen has a lot of ups and downs, injuries, and everything in between. What has this opportunity been like for you in 25 to just kind of see that the door is open and maybe it is whatever you can make of it?
Yeah, you said it the best. I'm going to, do everything I can to, provide for this team and, and if they, make a decision when, they got guys coming back and whatnot, I totally understand. But, while I'm here, I'm going to make the most of it and pitch the best I can.
All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it and continued luck.
Thank you.
That's about all you can do is make the most of that opportunity, and it sounds like Dylan Dodd is doing just that. So nice to catch up with him, and we'll see what he's able to do because the Braves will take all of the help they can get in that bullpen and could use maybe another lefty to help him out in that end. When we come back, we'll take a trip around the big leagues to talk about a mega trade in Major League Baseball. Rafael Devers heading to the Giants. A couple of teams that really don't like each other. The Dodgers and the Padres, well, they still probably don't like each other very much. And a few other topics as we take our trip around the big leagues. I'm From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game and the Odyssey app.
Baseball, talking Braves and beyond. Baseball with From the Diamond, Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Welcome back into From the Diamond on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. I am Grant McAuley. We are live from the Kia Studios, as always, in Midtown as the sun sets on another weekend. It's set down in Miami as well on the Braves, who really left some, I think, opportunity on the table in losing 2 out of 3 to the Miami Marlins. We will, of course, talk more about that later on and maybe spend a little bit more of our time getting set for what's ahead for the Braves, which is 4 crucial, critical, pivotal games against the New York Mets beginning at Citi Field on Monday night. We will, of course, preview that series as well. But a lot of other things happening across Major League Baseball. And I do this show at an interesting time, I think, because I always like to be, after the Braves are done playing a traditional day game. It would be nice if they won, but as we've already covered on the show, and that doesn't always happen, and I have no control over that, so we soldier on. We do the 2 hours anyway. But in any event, I'm also looking for stories around Major League Baseball that I'd like to kind of see what's going on there and have a little conversation about that. Palate cleanser, if you will. And I guess the Red Sox were looking for a palate cleanser as well, is the best way I can segue this one, because they were apparently at wit's end in their saga with third baseman turned DH, definitely not first baseman, as we covered on the show, Rafael Devers. One of the biggest contracts I think the biggest contract in Boston Red Sox history, signed roughly 2 years ago. There was a $300+ million extension agreed to by Rafael Devers with the Boston Red Sox to stay there for what looked like was going to be the next decade. And then I don't know how much went on really in 2024. I guess there's a Netflix documentary I could watch about that if I needed to. But here in 2025, things took a few very weird turns, and in part, it was because the Red Sox were doing what they should be doing in trying to get better. But their communication with Rafael Devers, it may have missed a few steps. Now, Jeff Passan wrote, I think, a very long and very detailed insight that I'm not going to have the time nor the inclination to go through in its entirety on the show about this saga. So I would encourage you to read that. It's up at ESPN. It's how this thing got so messy, basically. And I'm going to have Chris Cotillo of Mass Live on in a little while just to kind of really get into this, because the Red Sox have had, I think, a bit of a pattern of losing some of their star players, and that will wear on a fan base, whatever the reason is. Now, we can obviously see from the Braves fan side of things, there was the Freddie Freeman saga. Dansby Swanson left. Max Fried recently left. Players move on for a variety of reasons. Many times it's because they're going to be a free agent, and either they leave or you trade them. In this case, it was neither of those. This was, we wanted you here, and now we want you gone. And that ultimately is what happened here. So Devers was traded to the San Francisco Giants, a club that very much has been trying to get a premier slugger to come play by the Bay since Barry Bonds retired. Did you know that the last 30-homer hitter for the San Francisco Giants was Barry Bonds? And it has been nearly 2 decades? Well, the Giants know that, and they've been trying to fix it. They tried to sign Aaron Judge. They tried to sign Carlos Correa. They've gone after some big names, but they just haven't been able to lure in that slugger that can anchor the middle of that lineup and start depositing baseballs into McCovey Cove on a regular basis. Devers could be their guy. We'll see. The Red Sox got Jordan Hicks, who basically is just getting rid of some money that the Giants didn't necessarily want. Kyle Harrison, who's a decent left-handed pitching prospect. They also got outfielder James Tibbs and Jose Bello, a right-handed pitcher. So 4 players head to Boston. But the Giants are taking on the roughly $250 million that was owed to Rafael Devers over the next 8 years because they view this as the opportunity to go out there, make a preemptive strike with an opportunity to contend this year and beyond and start setting themselves up. And Buster Posey is now the general manager of the San Francisco Giants, so quite a move for him in the early going of his tenure there. But I think a lot of the focus of this obviously has been on why the Red Sox would not want Rafael Devers. And the too long didn't read version of it is the Red Sox went out over the winter, they signed Alex Bregman. Bregman is a great third baseman. They wanted him to play third base because he's better defensively. How they communicated that to Rafael Devers, that I think is where the jury's out a little bit. But either way, Devers viewed himself still very much as a third baseman. Well, they convinced him after some conversations ultimately in spring training that, hey, put away your glove. We just want you to DH. Just come to the park and hit. That's all we need. And then Tristan Casas got hurt. And when that happened, the Red Sox found themselves needing a first baseman. And they made, I would say, a judgment call that 99 times out of 100 most teams would probably make, and that's, well, be a team player. We know this is not ultimately where you're going to be, but could you help us out and play first base? And Rafael Devers said, in pretty much no uncertain terms, no, I don't think so. And thus, about a month ago, I feel like that pretty much put us on a path that we saw happen Sunday night. So when I brought all this up about Sunday night and what we're doing here on the show, and I get off the air 5 minutes later, so, Rafael Devers has been traded to the San Francisco Giants. I just talked about baseball for 2 hours, and I didn't get to talk about that. And here I am looking for stories from the rest of baseball to discuss, and this seems like a pretty big one. So we're getting a make good here. But let's hear from Red Sox President Sam Kennedy, who weighed in on this deal. Craig Breslow is the general manager of the Red Sox. They had a 40-minute press conference to explain this whole thing. But yeah, Kennedy, I think in no uncertain terms, laid it out pretty clear that they felt confident about their decision to move on from Rafael Devers.
Every player decision is its own individual decision. And as I said at the outset, it's really, really hard when we either can't line up with our own players who become free agents or we don't line up on extensions. Obviously, very different circumstances. But I'll put our record up against anybody else's in Major League Baseball over the last 24 years. We're incredibly proud of what we've built here. We've got more trophies and banners to show for it than any other organization in Major League Baseball, and we are so proud of that. And this clubhouse believes in itself, and we believe in them. And I think our players are going to be pretty vocal over the next couple months about the belief in themselves and what they've been put together to do.
Well, a few things there. The last part, I think, was the most telling, was that, hey, I think our players are going to be a united front about this as well. And I'm going to ask Chris Cotillo about this and what the vibe is around the team. And going forward, we'll really find out, because the bottom line is you just traded your best hitter. And even if you do have other talented players, even if you do go sign another good third baseman, you still, in the short term at least, have taken away a very good player. Now, there may have been very good reasons for doing that. That's the other thing, because it sounds like from a clubhouse cultural fit that the Red Sox did not vibe with what Rafael Devers was putting out there. And they are a team that is very much trying to build with young talent. So if you feel like somebody in there, no matter how much they're paid, is just a malcontent, you can be traded. It ultimately can happen. I guess unless you have that ironclad no-trade clause, which clearly wasn't in place here, then stranger things have happened than a team deciding, all right, well, we're just over the headache. Let's get something for him and move on. Now, they've also brought up some nice young players. Roman Anthony, number one prospect in baseball recently, as well as Marcelo Meyer. They just sent Christian Campbell down to the minor leagues, but they got some building blocks and they've got some pieces, and they're right there in a 4-team race in the American League East. So it'll be fascinating to see what the fallout is in the short term and the long term, and I will talk to Chris Cotillo about that here in about 12 or 15 minutes or so. Meanwhile, out west, a couple of teams that still don't like each other, but you already knew that, and that's the Los Angeles Dodgers and the San Diego Padres, who played a midweek series at Dodger Stadium and ultimately could not let cooler heads prevail by the time they got to the final inning of the final game of that series, as the Padres superstar Fernando Tatis was at the plate, and a rookie making his major league debut, no less, Jack Little, was on the mound, and this happened.
Oh, boy. And now the bench is clear. Mike Shildt and Dave Roberts trying to get at each other. We'll talk later, Dave Roberts is saying.
Yep. And that's not talking. That means in the hall. We'll see one another in a hall.
Well, I don't know if they saw each other in the hallway, but they definitely both made it to a podium after the game, and I'll get to that. But the short version of this is, as you heard, Fernando Tatis, well, you might have surmised because this is not television, but I'll tell you because it's radio and that's how that works, hit on the wrist with a 93-mile-an-hour fastball. Now, I don't think, and I've watched a lot of guys get hit by pitches. Some of them look like they're intentional. Some of them don't. I think that this is kind of a combined frustration of Tatis getting hit a lot this year, and Mike Shildt's a fiery guy. I don't know if it's limited to just what happens between the white lines or if it happens at Starbucks when his order's wrong. But he's an intense dude, and he was out there being an intense dude, and Dave Roberts did not like it too much at all. And I think it does come down to, obviously, the two clubs have history. They got a rivalry. They have not always liked each other, and clearly they're contending for the same division. But Dave Roberts shared, and this is a little bit of a lengthy clip, but a lot of context about how he saw everything that transpired from Tatis getting hit by a pitch to how Mike Shildt handled that and what exactly went on between the two managers as the bench is cleared behind home plate at Dodger Stadium.
The way I see it, the way I saw it was Jack Little was making his major league debut. He's trying to get through the outing, and we're trying to get him to finish the game, and he hits Tatis with an arm side fastball. Obviously, I think anyone knows there was no intent. And I think even, Mike speaking the other day, talking about intent versus no intent. And so I think that anyone understands that there was no intent there. And even by my reaction, I didn't feel good about Tatis, a great player, good guy, getting hit. I didn't feel good about it. And so as he comes out and he's yelling at me and staring me down, that bothers me. Because to be quite frank, that's the last thing I wanted. I'm taking starters out of the game and, trying to get this game over and get this kid a couple innings. And so that's why I took that personal, because I understand the game and know that I understand it doesn't feel good to get hit, but understand, again, intent versus clearly no intent.
And that obviously was the question between the two managers. And it could have been, on Shilt's part, just the frustration of, look, that's our star player. We're not happy about that, and we're going to voice that displeasure. Now, they voiced it in a different way because Robert Suarez plunked Shohei Ohtani in the bottom half of the inning, and Dave Roberts did go on to say, I believe that one was intentional, though, and we're just going to move on. And I guess to go with what the broadcaster said, we'll see you when I see you, is kind of where the Padres and Dodgers are at this point. But both Shildt and Dave Roberts were ejected from the game in that finale. They both got one-game suspensions they served on Friday. Suarez is appealing his suspension, though, the Padres closer who plunked Ohtani. Ultimately, though, this is the kind of stuff that you can expect when you play each other too many times a year, and you've done so in a very, I think, high-profile rivalry over the past few years as well. Now, lost in all of this was the fact that Yoshi Yamamoto, the Dodgers starter in that Thursday game, almost did something great. How great? Well, he almost did something immaculate in that same crazy game because he struck out the first two hitters he faced in the third inning on 3 pitches. He went 0-2 on Fernando Tatis, and then he fired a fastball right down the middle, and this happened.
The 0-2. It is. Oh, no! Marvin Hudson cost him an immaculate inning.
I mean, that's not even close. That is... Wow.
Marvin.
I mean, that wasn't even borderline or anything. I mean, that was borderline middle.
Oh, can we get ABS on loader for the night from AAA?
Goodness.
Now, of course, the ABS is that automated balls and strikes, that challenge system that Major League Baseball will be moving toward in 2026. If you want to hear a little bit more about that, I had Saris on a few weeks ago. It's in the archive if you subscribe to From the Diamond, wherever you get your podcast. But no, you couldn't bar it on that night, but a fastball literally right down the middle. And home plate umpire Marvin Hudson called it a ball. I think everybody was surprised. I think Tatis was surprised. Obviously, you heard the Dodger broadcast on this as well, because an immaculate inning is 3 strikeouts on 3 pitches apiece. So 1 inning, 9 pitches, 3 strikeouts. It's been done fewer than 120 times in Major League Baseball history. It just doesn't happen very often. It's very cool. You don't get a trophy for it. It won't get you to the Hall of Fame because a lot of guys have done it, but it's just something you don't see very often. So pitch tracking shows that pitch in the overall, like the aggregate of all Major League Baseball umpires, like how often is this called a strike, or more to the point, how often is a fastball right down the middle called a ball? 99 out of 100 times this is called a strike. And Marvin Hudson was the one. You know that phrase where they say, don't be that guy? I think Marvin Hudson was kind of that guy for Yoshinobu Yamamoto. But then some crazy things happened, and everybody had basically forgotten about it by the end of the night. But I won't let you forget about it on this show. I thought it was crazy. And this is one of the few times I just wish that we could have the video component so that you could really see just how hideous that call was. But you've got social media, so knock yourselves out. The Yamamoto immaculate inning that wasn't. When we come back, we're going to get back into the Rafael Devers trade. I got Chris Cotillo of Mass Live joining me to talk about what it is that ultimately led to the divorce between Rafael Devers, the star third baseman / DH, and the Boston Red Sox, and his trade to the San Francisco Giants. It comes your way next on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game and the Odyssey app.
I love baseball. Now back to more Grant McAuley and From the Diamond on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Welcome back into From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game as we continue our trip around the big leagues. And we talked about it earlier, but we're really going to dig in now. The biggest headline across Major League Baseball, well, it happened right after the show went off last week as the Red Sox traded star slugger Rafael Devers to the San Francisco Giants. But this move is not quite as surprising when you start to peel back the layers of the deal. And to help us do that, I want to welcome in Chris Cotillo, who covers the Red Sox for Mass Live. He joins me right now on the WadeFord.com hotline because we got a lot to discuss because there are plenty of layers to the Rafael Devers trade. Well, Chris, I know this has been a very eventful week in Boston for not necessarily all the right reasons, but what felt like, I guess, as spring training unfolded and then some of the events of this season, maybe the inevitability of the Rafael Devers saga ending in a trade.
Yeah, it was a shocker on Sunday night. Obviously, Red Sox trading him to San Francisco for 4 prospects. The Giants take on the entire contract and all of that. But, the headline is really a messy divorce. It's not about who they got back or the money or any of that. Who's going to fill the spot in the lineup? It's really that, the team and their star player ended up really butting heads. And, it's been something that has been kind of coming to this crescendo for months. And obviously, everything hit the fan in a big way on Sunday night when he was dealt.
Yeah, I think that's a really great way to put it. It did kind of feel like everything hit the fan. I want to flash back to what the Red Sox were doing over the winter because everything around Devers and third base and the divorce, as you called it, with the Red Sox seemed to begin when Boston brought in Alex Bregman. And it's hard to argue that move wasn't made to make the Red Sox better. Obviously it was, but what was the communication like, and was there just a breakdown in the entire process with regard to conveying the expectations for the fallout of another third baseman coming in to Devers at that time?
Yeah, it seems like from talking to people around Devers, he was told during the offseason, hey, the Bregman stuff, the Arenado stuff, it's not true. Don't believe it. Don't buy it. And then, the Red Sox were talking about, well, if we do sign Bregman, he'll be a second baseman. Alex Cora said maybe a Gold Glove second baseman at that. So, they were kind of talking about, Rafi's our third baseman. He's the guy. As soon as Rafi got to camp, they signed Bregman. They said, hey, we're going to need you to DH. Bregman won the Gold Glove at third base last year, so you're the DH for this year. He did not take kindly to that, and then obviously when they asked him to play first, it was kind of like doubling down on a bad bet. And he scoffed at them both times, and they said, wow, we thought you'd be more of a team player, and then everything happened the way it did.
Yeah, and I think that that's really something that everybody at any level of baseball can really look at is you value the guys who can be a team player. And I don't know if that brush is necessarily fair to paint the entire situation with, because obviously there were a lot of moving parts to this deal and the way things happened, the Bregman acquisition or signing. Obviously what they told him in spring training, which was, if I understand correctly, throw away your glove. We're just going to ask you to DH. So it seemed like the rumblings kind of got quiet after spring training. He settled in at DH, and then the first base stuff kicked up, and it just really felt like that was the straw that broke the camel's back, if you will.
Yeah, I think, they were happy with obviously how he was producing. He was 0 for 19 with 15 strikeouts the first 4 or 5 games of the year. After that, he started mashing. He was great in the number 2 spot in the lineup, the DH, all of that. When he got traded, he had a 905 OPS. So that speaks for itself. Better pitch selection than he's had at any other point in his career. But they did ask him to play first base once Tristan Casas went down with a knee injury. And he basically said, are you guys kidding me? Like, I'm not doing that. And again, I think it was the Red Sox looking at it or kind of underestimating how he'd react and not knowing, how one of their best players would react. I think that's on them a little bit, but at the same time, there's a lot of players in that clubhouse that would have just learned the position on the fly. There's a lot of players that would say, hey, whatever it takes. They were starting, even when they played the Braves, and they still are, but they were starting Nick Sogard, who was a AAA player, Romy Gonzalez, who's a platoon guy, and Abraham Toro, a journeyman. Toro and Gonzalez have actually been okay over there, and they produced offensively, but in a perfect world, Devers going to play first. They could mix and match to the DH spot. Yoshida could play there when he came back, all that type of stuff. And Breslow went and asked him, and it was not just no, but no, and I can't believe you're treating me like this again. And then he went public with it, and it was, I think that's really where the House of Cards fell, and they just could not move on together at that point.
Yeah, it seemed to be pretty emphatic, the no that was given. And I also seen David Ortiz side of this, and clearly David played first base, then DH'd, and then when they'd ask him to play first base, interleague play and stuff like that, he would do that. What was your read on the comments of David Ortiz and maybe the relationship that one Red Sox great had with a guy who looked like maybe he was on track to being obviously a big part of what the Red Sox were building, but it just seemed like there was a bit of a disconnect between those two guys as well?
Yeah, I mean, I've never covered Ortiz, but I've learned over the years, stepping away from, rooting for him as a kid and just seeing how he goes about his business media-wise, that there's not much he keeps to himself. Yeah. And he's very bold with his opinions. And there's always kind of a, is David exaggerating here? But I do know that, there were a lot of different things in communication with Devers, communication lapses with him that were on Devers too. Jeff Passan just reported he didn't respond to Alex Cora reaching out to try to visit him in the Dominican over the winter, things like that. Devers, had a very, very, very simple outlook on all of this. And he said it in a video that went viral, him talking to Tim Hires, actually, who obviously you guys know well, but it was a couple years, maybe his rookie year, he was behind the cage, and he said, they pay me good, and I hit bombs. That's it. And that's what he wanted to do. He didn't want to do any of the other stuff. Why do I have to talk to David Ortiz? Why do I have to go and talk to the media? Why do I have to go on TV or go to sponsorship events or talk to Ken Rosenthal after I hit a walk-off homer? Just leave me alone and let me hit. And basically that is how he looked at things. And, when you're paid that much, I think the Red Sox and people like Ortiz and other people who have been in those shoes say there's actually more responsibility that comes with that. Devers never wanted to do it. Maybe he learned his lesson, but here in San Francisco, he's going to have Matt Chapman and Adames and some of these other guys that can be kind of the built-in leaders where he can kind of take a seat and just do what he wants to do, which is hit.
Yeah, that's some really interesting insight as well, and it does depend on the supporting cast, and the Giants do have some veteran players, and obviously, they've got third base taken care of, and the introductory press conference, the questions abounded about where exactly he would play, and it seemed like he was a little bit more open, a little bit more malleable, if you will, to what the Giants' vision may be. And yeah, not to get lost on an aside here, but I remember a young Freddie Freeman getting his contract extension. Then the Braves traded away a bunch of players. And at that time, Freddie was kind of quiet. He was kind of in the background. I'm not saying that he wouldn't be available if you needed him to be, but it didn't seem like the impetus or the onus was on him for that. Then as he started to grow as a player, obviously the Braves got a little bit better. He morphed into, I think, one of the great team first guys in the sport, so much so that he breaks his wrist and then decides, you know what, I'll go down and learn third base in a week so that Matt Adams, of all players, can get at bats at first base. And I think that's just kind of a study in contrast where you see stories like that, and then you see, I guess, on the flip side of this, not to villainize Devers because he's allowed to feel the way that he wants to feel, but I think there just is such an expectation. When you get the big money, the big contract, more is expected than just to show up, I guess, and hit bombs.
Yeah, and I think the Red Sox, again, it's part on Devers for never growing into that role, but also, like, you have to understand that's his personality, and you have to understand the guy didn't want to do it when you give him $300+ million. And I think, they did it in large part because they had to trade Mookie. They obviously saw Xander Bogaerts go to the Padres, all that type of stuff. Like, they had to lock up a homegrown star. I think they ended up locking up the wrong one. And that's where the Giants gave him the get-out-of-jail-free card by taking on all the money earlier this week.
Yeah, that is really interesting. And the Giants, of all clubs, seem to be one that weren't quite able to get their money to go as far as they wanted it to in the offseason when they did go after some big stars, whether it was Aaron Judge or whether it was Carlos Correa. And I know there were some medicals that were involved in that, but it seemed like they were obviously able to accomplish something they've been looking to do for a while here as Buster Posey makes a pretty big move in his first soiree into being a general manager in Major League Baseball. Chatting with Chris Cotillo of Mass Live. He covers the Red Sox. He joins me on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. I do have to ask, I know you brought this up earlier, that this was much more like a divorce and two parties that needed to go their separate ways, but in some ways, from the baseball operations perspective, did Boston get enough here? I know moving the salary was a major consideration, I'm sure, for ownership, but is money that central to the talent exchange, or was there just more to it on the personal side of things that just needed to split and move on?
Yeah, I think objective one was moving on, and then, from there, figuring out the return that made the most sense. The way I've said it all week is, Kyle Harrison and Jordan Hicks, James Tibbs, and Jose Bayo. Maybe you get a good player out of that. They think Harrison could still be pretty good, and they think that, Tibbs obviously could be a good prospect. He was a first-round pick a year ago. But really, the story's going to be told by what the Red Sox do with that $255 million that they saved by trading Devers. I think they were surprised someone was willing to take on the whole deal to get out of that. That was great. If you are dumping money to get under the CBT like they did with Mookie a few years ago, then, shame on you as a big market team. But if you are dumping it and then kind of replenishing by spending the money you saved, it's a different story. And I think they're going to. I just don't know how exactly. It's tough to do in June. Maybe by the end of July, they start making, progress on that front. But they kind of owe it to the fans to do that. Obviously, it's a team that, is playing really well. In the lead up to the Devers trade, they had a really good homestand. Won 3 series in a row, just swept the Yankees at home. He gets traded. They go to Seattle, and they win, 2 out of 3 there. So, it's a team that, is back above 500. They're in contention. The Yankees have scuffled, so the division is back on the table. I think they owe it to at least, buy at the deadline and buy in a big way. Just will, kind of see, how can you spend that money either now or in the winter.
Yeah, and obviously winning cures a lot of ills. I am curious because you are around the team a good amount, obviously, before the Devers trade and now during that process and moving forward. What's kind of the general perception or mood around the club? Because they did bring in some big prospects up from their minor league system, demoted another, as the case may be. But they got plenty of time, as you mentioned, to make a run towards October. But what's that path forward without a guy who was, at least at the moment, their best hitter?
I don't think the clubhouse is super beaten up over it. I've been in San Francisco on Devers watch for the last 4 days, so I've not been with the team. But my colleague who was in Seattle for the last series said it was kind of business as usual, and guys looking at it as, all right, we don't have him in the middle of the lineup. But I think there's also an acknowledgement that the fact that cloud is not over them anymore and that they don't have all that weighing on them in terms of the drama, the dysfunction, all that type of stuff. The way I've been putting it for months now is I think there's guys in the clubhouse that were looking at it and saying, I'm with Rafi on this. The Red Sox should not have moved him around, and should not have treated him the way they did. And then I think there's guys who look at it and say, hey, Rafi, I understand kind of everything at play here, but, fuck up. Go play first, Like, that's kind of how I think a lot of guys looked at it, too. No matter what side of the fence you were on, I think if you're a player in there, you have to look at it and say, this is a distraction. This makes us look dysfunctional. Our best player is kind of pouting in the corner, and it's just not a great feeling in here. So to have that gone, as much as it stinks for them to lose the production every day in the lineup, I think it kind of, maybe frees them a little bit to be more of a team. I know that baseball's individual battles and all that, but I do get the sense that there are some people in there that are saying, hey, all right, we can kind of go now. And obviously a big series starts here tonight at Oracle.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how everything kind of comes together in the aftermath of that. And as you mentioned, they do have a rather large chip to play now in terms of some money that they have freed up in the future. I do want to close out on this. You brought it up briefly. The Red Sox have traded Mookie Betts, now Rafael Devers, a couple of homegrown stars. Circumstances very different there, as you mentioned. Betts was not under a long-term deal either. But it's not easy on a fan base to lose those kinds of guys, especially when the expectations are to spend, win, and to contend in some order. Where do you feel like the Red Sox fan base is on this, or is it more about what happens in the future that could really tell the tale of the Devers trade at the very least?
Yeah, I think fans were really, really mad when this first happened, looking at it and saying, really this happened again. We fell in love with a homegrown guy and you guys couldn't figure it out. People were not really as mad at Devers. They were mad at the organization for bungling it. And I think that flipped on Tuesday when he got here and said he was willing to play wherever the Giants wanted him. I think fans watched that from home and said, oh, okay, yeah, good riddance. And I think there was a real kind of public perception flip there, which was interesting to see play out. So, again, it really comes down to what they do next. If they can tread water until the trade deadline, get Alex Bregman back, all that type of stuff, and really make a run, then, this is going to be old news at a certain point. But, at a certain point, the story also is just organizational dysfunction. You had to trade Mookie. There's a lot that's gone on the last few years. All the full throttle stuff from a couple off seasons ago where they promised big moves and did nothing. All that, fans just want to win. And that hasn't been the case for a long time. They made the playoffs once since 2018. The glory days of the Red Sox are feels like they're long past, and fans are sick of that. And so, kind of the onus is on them to be a big market, big spender again.
No, it definitely is. And I've heard this one phrase, and I could apply it to some of the things the Braves have been through the last few years, and certainly if you end up being one of those teams that is caught in a rebuild. But people don't like change. They like improvement. So that's what they expect to see from the ownership group and from the front office. And the Red Sox, I do think, are in a pretty good place, obviously, as they look to build something there and contend in the American League East, which is annually one of the toughest divisions, if not the toughest division in all of baseball. He's Chris Cotillo. I appreciate you making some time for me. Go ahead and let folks know where they can follow you and, of course, about your podcast as well.
Yep, MassLive.com. We cover the Red Sox quite obviously, and then the Fenway Rundown podcast.
All right. Well, Chris, I appreciate your time. I know you're a busy man, and I look forward to catching up with you down the line.
Sounds good, Grant. Thanks.
When we come back, we will turn our attention back to the Atlanta Braves, who have a big showdown with the New York Mets that begins on Monday at Citi Field with the first of 4 games. We'll discuss that and more as From the Diamond with Grant McAuley continues on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Baseball, talking Braves and beyond. Baseball with From the Diamond, Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Welcome back into From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. As we close out another show here, close out another weekend, and I guess put the finishing touches on what it was not for the Braves, but what this coming week could be for the Braves. Might be a good way to look at it. As you look at this Marlins series, I guess the 30,000-foot view is not great. You have a last-place team that you go play right after sweeping the first-place team in your division, and you lose 2 out of 3. No matter how it happens, the sting of that obviously feels like a setback when you're in the midst of a 13-game stretch against your National League East foes, 7 of which are against the Mets. I mean, mission number 1 was accomplished. That was sweep the Mets in a series at Truist Park. But the real question becomes, what Braves team is going to show up at Citi Field for the next 4 days? As we talked about earlier in the show, I mean, the Braves as a road team this year, that has been one of the many stats and many splits and many records that you can look at that kind of indicates that this is a club that's not getting the job done in certain areas and certain facets. We've talked about one-run games. We have talked about the record on Sundays, which is more of a thing for me to deal with. But no, they all count. But when you look at what they've done on the road, or more importantly, what they have not done, and that is win consistently. The Braves are 13-29. Now, they played 39 road games thus far, and that is a lot. I mean, that is more than half of their games thus far have been played on the road. And you might imagine when you start with 7 immediately right out of the gate, that's going to be tough. When you lose all 7 of those, it's going to be more difficult still to kind of erase that. And when the Braves went into that secondary tailspin, I'm calling it, in May, where they lost all those series in a row, all the work that they had done to climb back over 500, or just get to 500, and doing it the second fastest of any club that lost its first 7 or more games of the year in baseball history, it just kind of went down the drain again, and now they find themselves in this uphill battle. But it's a unique opportunity because of who you're playing and what each one of these what each one of these wins means in the standings for this Braves club. Now, Bryce Elder didn't, I think, have his A game, but one of the things I was curious about, and it's kind of a double-edged sword, do you want to call up a young prospect and have him wait and give him extra rest and have him start in the finale? Or do you want to give Bryce Elder a little bit of extra time because he went 8 games or 8 days between starts? And that is a long time, especially for a touch-and-feel sinker ball guy. And that doesn't mean that he necessarily would have come out Friday and been a completely different pitcher. I don't know that he would have. But that extra time, I don't think is always beneficial when it goes beyond like an extra day of rest. You hear all about that. Like the Braves would like to provide an extra day of rest to their starters. You don't want to provide 3 or 4 extra days. That, I think, starts to become, as I said, a little bit counterintuitive. But you also don't want to call up Didier Fuentes and say, all right, well, you haven't pitched in 7 or 8 days. Why don't you throw against major league hitters for the first time ever? I think that could also be an issue. But I was kind of curious, why not just go with the veteran Elder in Game 1 against the Marlins and look to start it out that way? But again, as we talk about many things, hindsight is just that. I mean, there's no changing it. What's happened has happened. But the Braves now find themselves 5 games under 500. They are a third-place team in the division, but the chasm between themselves and the Mets and the Phillies is still a double-digit deficit. So let's talk about a few things that the Braves need, or a few guys that the Braves need to really step up as they roll into Citi Field to face the New York Mets. Spencer Strider. I'm going to put him at the top of the list here because he's looking a lot more like Spencer Strider here lately. Now, I know he struck out the 13 Rockies, and I talked about this last week, and folks would say, well, of course he did. It's just the Rockies. But you started to see things inside that start, including, I think, the confidence in his slider and also the command that he had of his pitches in general that started to make me feel like, all right, Spencer Strider's maybe unlocking a few things here. He also had a tick up in velocity. And that carried over to the start against the Mets, where he went out there and tossed 6 innings of 1-run ball and struck out 8. And again, Spencer Strider looking a lot like the Spencer Strider you expected to see at some point. And I think that it couldn't happen at a better time because his first few starts, especially after coming off the injured list for the second time with a hamstring deal, I think people were very curious, especially about, the fastball. Is it ever going to come back? Well, we're seeing it start to trend back in the right direction. But as I've said, you don't have to throw every fastball 99 miles an hour to be effective. Does it help? Sure. It's very helpful. But big league hitters can time it up. If it's not straight, if it's not in the right spot, you can still get punished. And big league hitters are pretty good too. But I feel like Spencer Strider has kind of turned the corner there. And the other side of this, Spencer and Spencer, not an 80s TV show, not a law firm, is Spencer Schwellenbach, who was really one bloop base hit away from a much better-looking start against the New York Mets. The little bloop double down the right field line, Ronald Acuña Jr. dove for, and a couple of runs came in and scored. That's just some batted ball luck. But just imagine, that ball is caught, how much differently you feel about that game, even if every pitch he executed was the exact same. I thought that he was pretty good. He gave up a home run early to Juan Soto, but look, it's Juan Soto. And he's also, to use this phrase again, starting to look a lot more like Juan Soto after a very slow start to the year. And they're going to have to contend with that monster, among others. And I don't know if you saw the Mets yesterday, 7 home runs in one game, 7 solo home runs. So they can swing the bat a little bit. And Soto obviously is the tip of that sword. But I felt like overall, you like what you see from Spencer Schwellenbach because he's been this guy that you could kind of give credit for being just beyond his years and pitching beyond his experience because he was mostly an infielder in college, did some closing, got drafted, had arm surgery, came back, had thrown, 140 innings in the minor leagues in total in his career, and came out last year and was a viable Rookie of the Year candidate and one of the Braves' best starting pitchers. And he did it largely against postseason clubs. Remember last year, he made 10 starts against teams that went to the postseason. And Spencer Schwellenbach was 7-0 with a 1.89 ERA. That's ace-level stuff right there. overall, I went to look kind of a level further than that because clearly his career ERA is not 189. So, guys do score some runs from time to time against him, but 27 starts against 500 or better clubs at the time that he has faced them. He's got a 3.27 ERA in those. So he is quality against quality, and that's exactly what you need as you open up this series against the Mets because you're going to go with Schwellenbach. You're going to go with Strider. You're going to go with Didier Fuentes because you pretty much have to at this point, and then you'll go to Grant Holmes. And I'll do the pitching matchups a little bit more later. The Mets haven't decided on all of theirs, so it's still kind of TBD as of Sunday night. But that's who the Braves are going to be throwing in this series. And they had done all that work, obviously, to line up Chris Sale so that he would be able to throw in the first Mets series at Truist Park, the one in Citi Field, and then be able to make a start in the Phillies series as well that follows. And obviously the best laid plans don't always come to fruition, and the Braves are simply going to have to do a little bit more than next man up. It's just going to have to be, I think right now, really a sum of the parts type deal for the Braves. It's not about individuals. I mean, outside of Ronald Acuña Jr., I think he's pretty much shown that he's one of those individuals that can shine at a level that very few players in the game can, but he's only one guy. So he can't do all of this either. And I think we've learned that because just when he thought the Braves were going to get that boost of having Acuña back in an offense that very much needed a superstar-level player to come back, they honestly have kind of had one of their worst offensive months. It has been, statistically thus far, their worst month of the season because the Braves went from, I believe it was a 245 average in March, April, to a 242 average in May, to a 235 average in the month of June, and the majority of that, you've had Ronald Acuña Jr. back, and he has been playing at a superstar level, hitting close to 400. And that kind of lets you know some of the other guys have been going through it, and the different spots in the lineup that you're dealing with that just aren't getting it done. It's shortstop, offensively speaking. Nick Allen has been great in the field, but he's not going to give you a lot at the plate. Ozzie Albies, Michael Harris, those are two guys going through it this year. And then there's a left field platoon that I talked about a lot last week, hitting just over 200 with 2 homers and 16 RBI. That is not getting the job done. And maybe Jurickson Profar's return will start to turn that whole thing around. But when you've got 4, I'm not going to call them complete black holes, but 4 struggling spots in your lineup, that is hard to overcome. And if you've wondered, well, why does Brian Snitker keep moving this and this and this and this? Well, he's trying to do anything he can to inject a little bit of energy or create some protection perhaps that will help a hitter a little bit. I mean, we saw Matt Olson batting second again in the series against Miami, and I'm for it. I heard C.J. Nitkowski talking about it on FanDuel Sports. You want your best guys to get the most at-bats. Yes, you absolutely do. So if you can stack Ronald getting on base with Matt Olson, who's getting on base at a high clip back-to-back, and then you got Austin Riley and Marcell Ozuna after that, that's a pretty good top 4. But everything outside of Drake Baldwin, let's give him some credit. We haven't called his name a lot on this show, but he's continued to show that he'll put up a professional at bat and can come through for you as well. But outside of that, you got a lot of question marks in this Braves lineup. And that Ronald Acuña Jr.'s performance is not going to solely be able to override that. You're going to have to get something from these other guys to really start to create that consistency. And Profar, his return, at this point, I'll just point out, it can't hurt. It can only help. One would hope, because the left fielders for the Braves have been statistically ranked last or next to last in most offensive categories, and that's not going to get the job done, especially when your center fielder is also struggling to the point where I don't really know what the answer is for Michael Harris. You've moved him all over the lineup. The approach seems to be the real issue for him. He's very aggressive. The walks have absolutely disappeared, and he's ended up in some, I think, issues of his own doing, if you will. But getting back to the Braves starting rotation, I think you've got it set up as best you can with no Chris Sale. But you're going to have to throw the rookie against the Mets and Didier Fuentes, who will make his second Major League start. That should be in Game 3. This is according to the probables that the Braves have on their website. But you got Grant Holmes, who's pitching in that finale, and he's just very quietly putting together a really strong campaign. 3.71 ERA, may not knock your socks off, but as a back-into-the-rotation pitcher, that's pretty solid. 97 strikeouts in 85 innings for Holmes. 10.3 strikeouts per 9. I went and looked at the leaderboard. That's 10th in Major League Baseball. And if you had Grant Holmes as a top 10 pitcher in strikeout rate in Major League Baseball when the Braves were saying, hey, we're going to give him a shot to be a starter, congratulations. But they definitely played a hunch there, and they've been right so far. And him in the starting rotation has certainly been helpful when you think about what you've now lost with Chris Sale landing on the shelf here and without Reynaldo Lopez And tracking back even further than that, the loss of Max Fried and the loss of Charlie Morton, you knew this rotation was going to look different, and Grant Holmes has stepped up big time for them. But these guys are going to have to do some heavy lifting because that's what they've really done all season in order to keep the bullpen set up for success. The innings that the starters have thrown. And this stat, I think, still is one of the most telling about this Braves pitching staff because the starters have been so good at getting deeper into games. The Braves relievers have thrown the fewest innings of any team in Major League Baseball. And I think that's a reason why. I mean, if you've got questions in your bullpen, the less you have to open that door, obviously the better. Raisel Iglesias, I think, has looked better lately. That's a huge piece of getting things right out there. He got the chance in extras to beat the Mets this week, and I think he's going to get some more opportunities here and there to recalibrate. But for the most part, I think Iglesias is showing that he's starting to turn that corner and hopefully rebuilding just not that confidence in himself, but the confidence that the team needs to have in the guy who's in charge of those last 3 outs. One guy, though, who has been looking a lot better that we really haven't talked about much on the show, unless you're figuring out who's going to be voted off the island this week when the Braves have to make a pitching move, is Rafael Montero. Now, Montero, when he first came over, and the Astros paid a lot of his salary, and the Braves took on, I believe, somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe $3 million to bring him on. And I'd have to look at that. And sometimes you see the reports of that, and it's not even accurate. But the Braves took on a little bit of money to take a struggling reliever from another team because they just needed some help in the bullpen in general. And Montero came over, and the walk rate was just through the roof. But it seemed like over the last week or two, he's really starting to find his form. Last 4 outings, 5 innings for him, 1 hit, 1 walk, 8 strikeouts, scoreless baseball. Not a big sample size, but it's promising. And you need whatever you can get as far as contributions from the group. And Montero's doing that. Now, Inyo de los Santos has also been one of those guys that it might not be a household name, but for the most part, he's gotten the job done. I know he got knocked around against Colorado, insert joke here, at Truist Park about a week ago. Gave up those 4 runs, but those were the first runs he'd given up in a month. So he's gotten the job done more times than not. And you throw those guys in there with Pierce Johnson and Dylan Lee and Aaron Bummer and Raisel Iglesias, obviously, and you get those contributions from Montero and De Los Santos, and maybe Dylan Dodd is going to step in here and offer them that third left-handed option that they've been, I think, missing all year. All of a sudden, it's a decent group, but it's got to perform. But I know a lot of folks have kind of looked at the bullpen, and it's maligned just about every year. Those games that you lose, that you had the lead late, those get laid at the feet of the bullpen and probably the manager as well for making the decision to put the bullpen in the game. But there have just been so many of those this year where it just feels like if the Braves offense had been able to do more than go 2 for 10 with runners in scoring position or hadn't left 12 guys on base, you'd be having a different discussion because you can't expect the pitching staff to be perfect and operate on those margins all the time. So overall, the Braves have got to get themselves ready to get going this week at Citi Field. I did find one more little offensive stat. I was talking about this a moment ago. But runs per game for the Braves by month. In April, it was 4.2. In May, it was 4.0. This is not college, so that's not what you're looking for. But here in June, despite their lowest batting average of any single month and an OPS under 700 as a team, they're scoring their most runs per game, 4.5. So go figure. But as I talked about earlier, that can be deceiving because there have been a lot of games that have been lost because not enough runs have been scored, and the Braves are going to need more there. Outside of Acuña and Olsen, you just got to get some other guys going. And the Braves have been saying that all year long. I know I've been saying this on this show week after week after week, that that's what the Braves are going to need. Probables for the Mets series: Spencer Schwellenbach, Spencer Strider, Didier Fuentes, and Grant Holmes. And it's a big assignment for the rookie Fuentes in place of Chris Sale. It's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 7:10 p.m. Eastern time for all 4 of those games. And then the Braves will take on the Philadelphia Phillies beginning on Friday for a 3-game series. So a very crucial, pivotal, gotta have it stretch of baseball is ahead for the Atlanta Braves as they embark on this next week. That is all the time on From the Diamond for this week. I want to thank Pierce Johnson and Dylan Dodd for their time at the ballpark this week. I want to thank Chris Cotillo for checking in to talk about the Rafael Devers trade with me. And I want to thank Dom for doing a great job keeping the show going, as always, on the other side of the glass. And thank you for listening to From the Diamond. You can find me wherever you get your podcast and on the Odyssey app. And catch me on Sundays right here on 92.9 The Game for 2 hours of great Braves and baseball discussion. Until next week, I've been Grant McAuley. This is From the Diamond on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. And until next time, so long, everyone.